Dune, the 11 biggest differences and changes between the book and Denis Villeneuve's first movie. Let's begin with number 11, the opening scene. The 2021 film opens with a narration from the Fremen girl Chani. She explains the general details of her home planet Arrakis, her desert-dwelling people, and the long-standing oppression upon them from House Harkonnen. While the book provides many of these same details through exposition, it actually opens with the famous Gom Jabba scene. So I think the Villeneuve movies make a decision to focus a bit more on Arrakis and the personal experience of Paul, Chani, Paul's mother, the Fremen, and as such they perhaps de-emphasize the politics a bit. So I like this reframing. I like making it more focused on Arrakis. Number 10, the Princess Irulan. While the movie opens with the narration from Chani, the book makes frequent use of narrational exposition from a different character. Every chapter of the novel opens with an excerpt from a written text by the Princess Irulan, daughter of the Emperor. Dune Part 1 does away with this aspect of the book almost entirely, as it instead shifts most of this exposition to Chani's opening monologue. I guess this makes sense as a change because if we were going to see these excerpts on screen, if we were going to perhaps even see the Princess Irulan on screen in Part 1, that's potentially quite confusing. So again, the decision to narrow the focus perhaps on a more Arrakis-focused story than perhaps the books always are, I like that decision. Number 9, Fade Router Harkonnen. Another character whose introduction was delayed to Dune Part 2 is the prideful nephew to Baron Vladimir Harkonnen, who serves as a narrative foil of sorts to Paul. I mean, it's already a very long story, so I guess you've got the Baron there as kind of the representative of House Harkonnen in the first movie. How many Harkonnens can you really fit in? I'm okay with him being omitted from Part 1. Number 8, Liet Kynes. The planetologist Liet Kynes is one of the rare characters in Dune that factors almost exclusively into the first half of the book. The character's gender was actually flipped from that of the book. One change we can talk about is Kynes' death at the end of the film. In the film, Kynes is wounded by a Sardaukar soldier while calling a sandworm with a thumper, which causes her and her assailants to be consumed by the Shai-Hulud worm. I really like this change. I think it's a much more dramatic and visual death than what the planetologist gets in Dune. I think it's a really cool shot that establishes the character of the worm, so don't really care about the gender swap, don't think it really matters, but the different death I thought was really good. It looks great on screen. Number 7, the Sardaukar. One of the few outright changes the film makes is the attire the Sardaukar are dressed in when they invade Arrakis and destroy House Atreides. In the book, they are disguised as Harkonnen soldiers to hide their involvement. The film removes this and has them dressed in traditional Sardaukar uniforms. I mean, I guess that makes things less confusing for the casual viewer. We need those casual viewers if we want more movies like this, I guess. 6, Paul's first encounter with the worm. This is the scene in which Kynes, Paul, and his father Duke Leto travel into the desert to see the spice harvesters at work. After an equipment malfunction, they then witness the entire apparatus being swallowed whole by the enormous worm. So in the film, Paul almost dies, almost consumed by the worm along with the harvester. In the book, he basically never leaves the ornithopter. I think this is a good change. Much more visual, much more exciting to watch. I mean, I accept it's more realistic that someone like Paul is not going to leave the ornithopter, but it's much more interesting to see him in a bit more danger. Number 5, the dinner scene. One of the most well-regarded scenes from the original novel comes shortly after the Atreides arrive on Arrakis. The scene in question features the Duke and his family hosting a dinner for many of the most important figures on the planet at the time. There are guild bankers, merchants, smugglers, and representatives for the Emperor in attendance. It is during this scene much of the political intrigue and strife of Dune comes into focus and is really put on full display. So yeah, the dinner scene, it gives a lot more to the world. It gives us some context beyond just the Atreides and the Harkonnens. It's the kind of thing you can find time for in writing, but in a TV show or in a movie, every scene counts. Is it strictly necessary to the story of the Muad'Dib to include this scene? So I guess it had to go for that reason. Number 4, the Mentats. There are a lot of different kinds of characters presented in Dune, but some of the most interesting in the books are the Mentats, who are essentially human supercomputers. The existence of computers and artificial intelligence in the Dune universe was banned outright over 10,000 years prior to the events of the book, and as such, humanity evolved and trained certain individuals, Mentats, to possess the mental abilities to fulfill that role. I think the Mentats, there's a lot to sort of process there. It takes a lot of explanation. Timothée Chalamet is in a few scenes in the first movie, and it is kind of a shame that this is a thread that was dropped, because I think it does add something to the universe. It adds something to the character of Paul Atreides. So yeah, I kind of understand it being cut out, but I think it is a bit of a loss to the films. Number 3, suspicions of a traitor. One of the major twists in Dune Part 1 is the revelation that the Atreides' personal doctor, Dr. Yu, had betrayed Duke Leto and paved the way for the Harkonnen attack on Arrakis. This reveal comes somewhat out of nowhere in the film, although it is part of one of the chief subplots in the early part of the novel. Yeah, I think this is a pretty big loss to the film, to be honest. In the movie, it feels like the Atreides faction is extremely fatalistic about the fact that they're going to lose the war to the Harkonnens. They're extremely fatalistic about how the Emperor has set them up for failure. My memory of reading the book is that the search for the traitor, who many of them think is the Lady Jessica, is quite extensive and ongoing. And yeah, I do agree that the Atreides in the movie feel like they're going to lose because that's what's got to happen to make the plot happen. So the loss of the traitor, I mean, how many minutes on screen would it have taken to establish this subplot properly? I imagine quite a few more minutes than they actually had. In terms of things I didn't like about the Villeneuve adaptation, this is probably the biggest thing. It just feels a bit, they arrive on Arrakis, they're a bit worried about stuff, everybody dies, and off they go into the desert. Yeah, this is the change I didn't really like. Number 2, the meeting of Paul and Chani. In some ways, the film is very faithful to their meeting from the book. Paul climbs to the top of a cliff for a better vantage point from which he can defend his mother from the Fremen. As tensions diffuse, Chani reveals she was watching him the whole time and would not have permitted him to harm her companions. Number 2 is kind of intertwined with number 1, Paul's fight with Jamis. In the film, Paul had visions of Jamis being a friend and teacher to him, but in reality, Jamis challenges Paul in a duel to the death almost immediately upon their meeting. In the book, it isn't until a little while later, when the Fremen are sheltered in a cave, that Jamis challenges Paul. So the fight gets brought up. I guess that's a runtime thing. In the book, Chani gives Paul some advice on fighting Jamis. In the movie, that advice is not forthcoming. I guess these last two, it's kind of a runtime thing. It doesn't make a lot of difference in the long run. If the fight happens now, it's very sort of early days for Paul as a Fremen. So that's the 11 biggest differences between the book and Dune Part 1. Thanks for watching.